Welcome to Building Legendary Leaders, the podcast where leaders leave behind chaos and step into clarity. This is where real stories come alive with the struggles, breakthroughs, and lessons that shape the most effective executives today. Every episode delivers fresh insights you can apply to your own leadership journey. If you are ready to stop putting out fires and start leading with purpose, this is the place for you. Here is your host, Jim Saliba.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Building Legendary Leaders. Before we introduce our guests, let me quickly remind you that we're building legendary leaders here. Leadership is awful, lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. If you find value in these stories, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button. And more importantly, if you know a leader who's striving to level up or someone who can gain insights from what we share, please send an episode their way. This show only grows with leaders like you who share lessons in their circle. So let's build this legendary community together. And with that said, I'd like to introduce today's guest. He's navigated a diverse career across 8 categories from packaging goods at P&G to e-commerce at eBay. He served as the GM and head of marketing for KFC International, scaling a brand across global markets. As president of H&R Block, he led a significant operational transformation. He's the author of Learn to Leap: How Leaders Turn Risk into Opportunities. And today, he's reshaping the future as the leader and coach of currently emerging CMOs financing startup organizations. Please join me in welcoming Kip Knight.
Well, Jim, it's a pleasure to be here.
Today, we're diving into the integrity line, leading up without compromising values. And here's how we're going to break it down. Unpack how leaders can land in with a bad boss situation, and then there's a ripple effect in performance across the teams. We're going to navigate the ethical tightrope of challenging a problematic boss while safeguarding your own values. Architect a strategy for repairing damaged relationships with superiors. And for those who stay to the end, Kip is going to tell us his secret sauce on how to hit the reset button on a bad start. You know, Kip, I talked about you this morning, what we're going to get into a little bit before we start in our conversations. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you that I didn't talk about or that we won't find on LinkedIn?
Well, Jim, I've got one of the more unusual careers. As you mentioned, I've worked in 8 different categories. Interestingly enough, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer growing up in Louisiana, but I guess I had a little bit of marketer inside me. I did some research on the number of projected lawyers and said, standing out in the field that big is going to be tough, and I'm not sure that's my natural strength. So I pivoted over to marketing. And I have been in either marketing leadership role or general management role for, believe it or not, like 45 years. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to give you some perspective from both sides of the table, from what it's like to have a bad boss and also to hopefully remind folks who are bosses how they can be better.
Hmm. So I thought you were going to say how to be on both sides of the line, right? Dealing with a bad boss and being a bad boss.
Well, no, hopefully that's not going to be the goal for today. But I frankly have learned more about being a great boss from my bad bosses because I've seen firsthand what bad boss looks like, feels like, and the damage it can do. One other fun fact in getting ready for this podcast, I was just curious, how many folks are actually trained to be a manager before they're given the title? And well, Jim, you probably know this, but what would your guess be? What percentage?
My guess would be less than 10%.
Well, supposedly it's a little bit better than that. Estimates are between 40 and 60% have some type of training. Now, can't say how much or how good that training's been. But in defense of bad bosses, I'm not going to defend them too much, but if you're given a role and you're not really prepared for it, you're probably going to make a lot of rookie mistakes. And so again, the spirit of this podcast is to say to all those people out there, both current and future bosses, here are some tips on, at a minimum, how not to be a bad boss, and ideally how to be a better boss.
I saw some statistics that were a little bit different, that say that many people do not get any type of leadership training, which is different than management training, right?
It is. Uh-huh.
Until 10 years into their leadership career. What a sad statistic.
Well, and I was very lucky, coming up through the ranks because I started out at P&G, and they only promote from within, so they put a lot of emphasis on training. And then PepsiCo, they put a lot of emphasis on both management and leadership training. So, unfortunately, I think a lot of companies look at that type of investment as a waste of money. And the sad part is, it's probably one of the best ROIs you could ever get in terms of the ability of your leaders to really get that incremental effort from the team that otherwise they're never going to volunteer.
So you said that a lot of managers come into the promotion without much experience or training. And I've seen this a lot, especially in technology, where we'll have someone who can code well, we make them a team lead. And then after a few years, we make them a manager. And we lose on both ends because we lost someone who's a good technologist into management and they don't know how to manage yet. And they often end up becoming a micromanager because they say, well, I'm here because I do things right. So I want everybody to do things right.
Hmm. Yeah, and a micromanager, in my experience, is the absolute worst kind of a manager to have because the fundamental bond between a manager and whoever they work with has got to be trust. There's got to be, in fact, one of my favorite books is called The One Thing You Need to Know by Marcus Buckingham. And his definition of a manager I love is it's somebody that believes in you even when you're not believing in yourself. In other words, somebody who's got your back, and they'll get you off the floor. They'll give you a certain amount of grace as far as if we all screw up, but the difference between a great boss and a bad boss is a bad boss will take that as an opportunity to chop your head off, whereas a good boss will go, okay, what did you learn from that? What would you do differently? And let's get up off the floor and try it again. But the other point I'd make, because I agree, a lot of these people are what I call battlefield promotions. One of the most important conversations that all management has to have is their uh, planning for future promotions. In other words, Jim, do you want to be promoted? And if so, why? And what's your time horizon? And it's perfectly okay for somebody to go, you know what, I love what I'm doing. I frankly don't want the responsibility or the hassle of managing other people, so I'm good. And that should be fine for an organization because you're going to need both. You're going to need both managers and people that work for those teams. So one of the most important questions that you have in an annual discussion with somebody is, Jim, where do you see yourself in a year? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? And that'll be the start of a great conversation for your development plan. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people actually go through that discipline. And it's the sad part is very simple. This is not rocket science. This is something that most people should be able to even remember without looking it up, but they don't.
I find that really interesting that often when I'm coaching leaders, director level and above, often, way too often, they really don't know the aspirations of the people that are working for them. And this leads into micromanaging and really focusing just on the delivery rather than how we deliver and how do I get the team to do their best work. So we talked about bad boss and we used that term a couple of times and we talked about integrity in the introduction. Let's bring this together a little bit. Kip, can you tell us a time or a story where you felt you had to draw a line in the sand to deal with a bad boss, but protect your integrity at the same time?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying I'm not going to name names because that wouldn't be fair, but I will tell stories that will illustrate the point. And I've been really lucky, Jim. I've had about, well, probably 20 bosses in my career. And I'd say, with the exception of maybe three of them, they were either good or great. But I'll tell you about one of the bad ones I had. I was at Procter and Gamble. I was brand manager on Ivory. Had a particular boss who there was just a ongoing sense of dread in working with him because, for lack of a better word, he just always seemed pissed off. I don't know if he was specifically pissed off at me or just mad at the world, but the encounters never were very constructive or supportive. It was almost a hostile negotiation. And so, to answer your question about a situation where you had to draw the line, I in leading up to this, I was in a meeting with the ad agency, and normally ad agencies are going to talk about, at least when I was doing this, the upcoming television commercial. But as a little bonus in Louisiana, we would call that lagniappe. It was a little bonus at the end of the meeting. They said, "Hey, we've got a promotional idea for you," and I was intrigued, and so they brought out these miniature bars of Ivory soap that we would have as an on-pack for the product. And I just thought it was really clever, especially if it might appeal to young women who were trying to attract. Well, this particular boss I had um, stopped the meeting, pulled me out in the hallway, proceeded to just read me the riot act about what you did in there was sacrilege. Nobody ever insults the Ivory brand the way you just did. And I'm just sitting there going, "What are you talking about?" And he was so upset with me, dragged me down to his boss's office and gave me a chewing out. And I could tell that his boss was wondering the whole time, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" But he didn't say anything. So that was a little bit of a precursor to, things are not looking good for me in terms of the way I'm performing. But I didn't think I did anything wrong. So literally about a month later, he came in to my office and slammed the door, and he sat down. And this guy was a former college football player, so big guy, so physically intimidating. So he leans in, he goes, "I've been thinking, and I've decided this company is not big enough for me and you." And at that point, I just took a breath and I said, "Well, gee, I'm really sorry to hear that. When are you leaving?" And he got really upset. So that's the kind of smart ass attitude I'm talking about. And at that point, I just had to, take the gloves off, saying, "Look, I don't know what your problem is, but you've obviously had it in for me. I'm really doing the best I can. I think I'm actually doing the right thing. I know our results are pretty good, so there's nothing to yell at me in terms of the business. But if you want to go to the mat, let's go, because I'm not going to be intimidated. It's easy for me to quit and walk out the door. I'm not going to make it easy for you." And so that kicked off. Well, and so he left. And the one tip I would give anybody in that situation is you've got to do two things. First of all, you've got to document what is going on, because it's going to be a whole bunch of HR, what happened then and what did you say and what did he say? So document the hell out of what's going on, or at least your side of it. And second, you've got to pull in every ally you ever had in the company. So I immediately called an emergency meeting of the other three people that work for this guy. And I said, "Here's what's going down. He's coming after me. How are you feeling about your job security?" And every one of them said, "Man, every day is a nightmare. This guy's just after me too." And I said, "Well, we can either die individually or we can live together. So if you will back me up and let the company know what a absolute jerk this guy's being, then maybe we've got a chance." And I'm pleased to say about 3 months later, he got fired because the company started to dig into a lot of the stuff he was doing, and decided he needed to go find his happy place somewhere else. I ended up having to go to a different division. It was very disruptive and all that, but I was really proud of myself for taking a stand and just saying, um, you know, "I'm not going to go without a fight." Now, there are some times in which it's just not meant to be. Maybe it's just not a good fit. Maybe you don't have the right skill set or the right experience. So I'm not saying to resist being fired no matter what. But if you feel like you're doing a good job and you've got some people that'll back you up on that, draw a line in the sand and say, "This far, no further." And, maybe you'll lose anyway, but you'll feel better about it.
So if you're working in an environment like that, and he's doing the same thing to many people, so it's not just singling one person out. What type of performance happens in the team and that ripples through the organization?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it again. I call it voluntary effort. If you've got a great boss and you've got a good culture, then people are more than happy to give the extra effort. They'll stay late, they'll work weekends, they'll, think about it. They're in a real proactive, let's figure this out together and win as a team. If you've got a boss that is on the attack or very negative, the exact opposite happens. You are not going to say anything at all that you don't need to say. You're going to put in the minimal amount of work that is required. You're probably going to spend a lot more of your time thinking about your escape hatch. And ultimately, the company is going to not get anything close to the level of collective effort that they would have if they had great leadership. Again, going back to the point we made in the beginning about training and emphasis, if you're in a company that values strong leadership and strong management, those kind of bad habits are less likely to happen. But if it's laissez-faire and you're promoting people simply because they've been around a long time or they happen to be good at what they do, and now we've got to have them manage some people, then good luck, because great management and great leadership are typically not an accident. They're typically something that are very strategic in nature and very thoughtful and invested in. So there's the choice, America. Do you want to have great managers, or do you want to continue to muddle along?
It's interesting because a number of years back, I was doing some talks and I would start off about your boss. And I would get people in the audience to raise their hand if they ever had a bad boss. And almost everybody raises their hand. And I say, okay, talk to the person next to you about what was the worst thing about this particular boss. And the room is buzzing and talking, and everybody is going. And then I turn around and I say, okay, now tell me about your best boss. And the room gets really quiet. And not too many people have as many stories about their best boss, but they awfully have a ton of stories about their worst boss. I find that really amazing, or is it that we're always looking at the negative and we never see the positive in front of us?
Well, if I'd been in the audience, I would be very enthusiastic about the great bosses I've had. And I'm very open, talking about the great bosses I've had. I've had many. Two of them that I uh, think of on a regular basis is Bill Cobb, who, believe it or not, Jim, I worked for about 15 years in three different companies. And then a guy named Peter Hurl, who we worked with. We worked together in London and turned around the KFC business over in the UK. So I think it's a shame that people don't have more hero stories to tell. Um, but the reminder to all of us is that each one of us has the opportunity, if we are a manager, to be a great manager, but to really put some effort into it and put some thought into it. And frankly, to be open to feedback from your team. And there's a fine balance here, because you don't want to be the kind of boss that people can just walk all over or take advantage of, or they kind of laugh behind their back and go, I don't know how that guy got in the job. He's not very well qualified for it, but he's not giving me a hard time. You don't want, that's another definition of a bad boss. Maybe people can put up with it, but they're certainly not inspired by it. Uh, on the other hand, one of the things I've tried to do, and another tip I would give folks, is study what makes great managers great. If you had to articulate why he or she was your best boss, specifically did they do? What were their behaviors? What were their attitudes? And one of the things great bosses do that I've noticed, maybe I'll ask you if you've seen the same thing. They typically have mantras. Like Bill Cobb, he had two mantras that I actually used quite a bit when I was managing teams. The first was disagree and commit. And man, oh man, is that one important. You're not working for a democracy. You're working for a benevolent dictatorship. So He wanted you to debate every aspect of a problem. But by God, once the team made a decision, or maybe specifically once he made a decision, there was no Monday morning quarterbacking allowed, because that is the quickest way to destroy momentum of anything you can do. So disagree and commit. And the other one Bill had that is very pertinent to this conversation is believe in positive intent. Um, Hopefully, most people don't wake up and think, I'm going to be a real asshole today. I really love being an asshole. I can't wait to just chew people up. Now, I guess maybe there's some people out there like that. But give people a little bit of grace, including your boss. Maybe there's something going on in their life that you're not aware of. Maybe they got a personal crisis, or a kid is sick, or they got some financial difficulties, or who knows. So I think Bill's mantra of believe in positive intent kind of lays the groundwork for a more productive and trusting relationship than if you go in there with knives drawn and you're just looking for an excuse to have a fight with somebody.
I love that. If I had a mantra, it would be how to, let me see, it would be experiment, 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 right? Small experiments, fight that whole perfection thing. People don't move because they want get everything perfect first, and I see this all the time. And while I'm getting some people to build momentum with experiments, others are just sitting on the sidelines trying to get the best presentation deck going. And that is often challenging sometimes. We have problematic bosses for many reasons. They want to make things perfect. They may be challenging their own confidence sometimes. So if you have a problematic boss, how do you safeguard your own values and navigate that tightrope?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, especially in the beginning, um, I would really try to figure out what is the owner's manual for working with that person. And I use that term deliberately because I've actually, when I've coached some people, I've suggested, and they've actually put together an owner's manual. I mean, think about the people you've worked for, Jim, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But if they had given you on day one, hey Jim, here's the owner's manual. Here's the way I like to communicate. Here are the things that really tick me off. Here are the things that I am especially passionate about. Here are my expectations in terms of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because frankly, because you don't have an owner's manual, it's a lot of trial and error, and some of that stuff can do some reputational damage. So that's thought number one. Maybe you could help them create their own owner's manual, or just ask some of the questions I've just asked so you get off to a good start. Second, I would do a relationship check on a regular basis. And one of the things I've done later in my career, and especially a lot more as a coach, is to ask the question, instead of how are you doing, is how are you feeling? To really try to understand emotionally, where are we going with this, relationship? Are we feeling good about it? Or frankly, are we starting to build up some resentment, or some concern, or some antagonism that frankly just needs to be aired? Because another um, favorite book of mine is, I think Riz is the author. It's the Four Agreements. I'm sure you've seen of that one. And one of the big agreements is don't make assumptions, because oh my God, how many times have you gotten into a fight or had a problem based on a certain assumption that turned out to be either flat out wrong or just wrong enough to make a difference? So my other tip for just making sure you've got a good relationship is do a weather check. Like how are you feeling? How are you doing? Are there some things that we could do together better? And maybe some of that is process. One other tactical tip I could give everybody is, um, as a manager, what I would have people do is to come in once a week with a one-on-one. I would have them give me a one pager in advance. I call it the three P's. I learned this from one of my bosses at eBay. Three P's: problems, progress, and plans. And so we would go through, okay, progress over the last week is this, the problems you're dealing with are this, and the plans you've got to deal with them are as follows. I kept that. And so at the end of the year, in an annual review, it became very easy. And, when I've shared that with a few folks, they go, I don't believe in one-on-ones. I think if somebody needs me, they can, okay, I'm calling BS. That, especially if you have more than one or two people reporting to you. I don't care how smart you are. There's no way you're going to remember all of the various things that are going on during the year. So again, if somebody takes away from this podcast a practical tip, try the 3 Ps format with your boss. And that way you can document your progress and frankly, your challenges. And if it goes ugly and your boss says, well, this guy's not done anything for me, the first thing you pull out is, hey, I got lots and lots of these weekly summaries. So let's kind of go through that and see if what he's saying is accurate.
I love that. I believe in one-on-ones myself, and I've always done them, and I like to keep them separate from those those status meetings that I like to do with the group. So many people who do one-on-ones, they say they don't believe in it because they're going over the same status that they did in the status meeting, just individually. I like your 3 Ps. It allows that person to design or the agenda for the meeting and talk about it. And I 100% agree that you get an easier way to write up the annual review because you have all these things that we've talked about during the year and the progress. I think that is fabulous.
I'm going to add one more to that, Jim. I always volunteered to write my own review, which some people might think is a bit strange, but I did it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was a favor to my boss because writing up reviews are a pain in the butt. So if I could take the drafted history, that would be fine. Number two, I always took the attitude, I'm going to be harder on myself than you're going to be on me. So it was not a puff piece. It was like, hey, Kip did this and this and this and this. But on the other hand, he did not achieve the following. And here's why. And here's what he's going to do to get better at it in the following year. All my boss had to do was put a cover note on it saying, and I've literally had this happen a number of times. I agree with Kip's attached review. Sign his boss.
I always had bosses who made me start out writing my own review. At first I thought it was lazy on their part, but it actually got me to think about my own performance more. And yes, I was always harder on myself than any boss was on me.
Yeah, one time I had my boss, I think you're being too hard on yourself, which that's a good sign. If your boss thinks you're being too tough on yourself, then you're going the right direction.
So, what if I don't have that relationship with my boss and it got damaged? How do I hit that reset button we talked about and redo that?
I've actually done that a couple of times. Not specifically with a boss, but with some peers. I'm thinking of 2 examples specifically where we had an initial meeting and man, for whatever reason, it did not go well. And I'll give credit to the one guy who taught me how to do it. He stopped at the end of the meeting and goes, you know what? Let's try this again. He literally got up, walked out of my office, walked back in and said, hi, I'm, so and so, and I'm here to talk about such and such. And we had a little bit of a laugh over it. But after that, we got along fine. And I had a similar encounter a couple of years later with a new CFO. And I told him I didn't feel like this initial meeting went well. He left in a little bit of a huff, but then he came back in and he was a little bit sheepish about it. He goes, you know what? You're absolutely right. That was not a very good meeting. It's important we work well together. And he introduced himself and we started over. And he's one of my closest business contacts these days. So reset buttons are fine. It gives you a chance to acknowledge that it's not where you want it to be. It declares positive intent, and it shows a certain vulnerability that you've got. Because again, we've not talked about vulnerability, but I think again the best bosses I've had didn't try to portray this image of I've got all the answers, or shut up and listen, or I never make mistakes. My best bosses were like, hey, we're all in this together. I appreciate what you're bringing to the party. I'm going to hold you accountable for your deliverables, but if there's anything I can do to back you up, I'm here for you. That is what everybody on a team wants to hear. And again, even though I've never been an athlete or anything like that, I do think there are a lot of analogies between athletic coaches and business coaches, because if you look at the great athletic coaches, I'd say the same attributes apply.
I 100% agree. And any coach, whether an athletic coach or a business coach, what makes that coach feel like they're successful, but the success of their players or the people that they're coaching?
Absolutely. And again, I'll give another tactical tip. Everybody should invest in some really good stationery. I learned this from a boss I had. And you get that embossed stationery, the 3x5 cards with the raised letters and all that other good stuff. But when I was president of H&R Block before every tax season, I had something on the order of like 30 district managers that covered the entire US. And I would handwrite a note to each one of them, and I would personalize it and talk about what they meant to me and what I was hoping they could do, and maybe one or two fun facts about their particular part of the country. And then I'd go out in the field, and I don't think they were showboating. They would literally have that stuck up on their desk as a daily reminder. And for all these people that say, well, yeah, I thank people in an email, trust me, the difference between getting a thank you in an email and a thank you on a handwritten nice piece of stationery is night and day. So another tactical tip to being a great boss, show your team that you appreciate them, and be specific. Don't just say, hey, thanks for a great job. Tell them exactly what about the work they're doing you appreciate, so they can take some ownership and pride in that, and probably double down and do more of that.
I used to do that, not on fancy stationery, but I would write handwritten notes to people on index cards. And yes, about why I'm thanking them and what I'm thanking them for. I can't be just generic about it. Well, let's understand a little further back on Kip. Tell us a little bit about you, how you grew up.
I grew up in Louisiana. I've mentioned that before, which is a really interesting place to grow up. I would argue it's probably one of the most unique states in the Union. It's got a real combination of cultures, everything from Cajun to Creole to Spanish to French to African American to English. And uh, one of the one of the stories I'll talk about having grown up, and this had a big influence on my life. Unfortunately, the Klan was very active in the small town that I grew up in. And if you've ever seen Mississippi Burning, that's what my childhood kind of looked like. There were literally crosses and Klansmen in hoods and all that other good stuff. And my mom, who recently passed away at the age of 93, I will give her eternal credit for being a reality check for us. She would tell us on a regular basis, this is not normal. This is not right. Everybody needs to be treated with the same amount of dignity and respect that anybody else gets. And based on that, at a very early age, it just taught me that just because you're seeing uh, the world around you act in ways that are not proper doesn't mean it's right, and doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. So, you know, thanks, Mom. That was a good lesson, and I tried to take those same learnings to the business world, because sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where your values are going to be tested, or your ethics are going to be challenged, or frankly your financial worth is going to be at stake. And I think that is the real acid test. Are you a great uh, leader? And frankly, are you a good person? Because um, having achieved the rank of Eagle Scout, and people make fun of the scout values and all that, but I think some of those values are eternal, and ones that we ought to remind ourselves of on a regular basis, in terms of trustworthy, loyal, kind, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, brave, clean, reverent. I'll debate anybody on any of those values. They don't have an important role in today's world, including the business world.
Well, I think it's interesting how many leaders I kind of talk to, and I bring up the term values, and they think it's kind of fluffy and touchy feely. However, when they talk about a boss, or they're having friction at work or problems, most of the time when we talk about it, we find out that there is a disagreement between values, personal and corporate values, or two personal values, and underlying that's what it is. So values are not so fluffy.
Oh, no, that values are the bedrock of anything we do, because if you disagree with your values, then you're playing a whole different game. You're playing baseball, I'm playing basketball. We're never going to agree on what a win looks like. So no, I totally agree that you start with values as the core of the foundation and you build it from there.
So this has been a great conversation. If you could leave one thing for leaders who are listening this today that they could do or try out on Monday morning, what would it be?
I'm going to go back to the topic of vulnerability. I think if you've got a certain level of trust with your team, and I would do this more in a one-on-one setting than in a group setting, I think for both parties' benefit. But great leaders constantly seek feedback. Like, hey, what do you think I could do to improve the way I'm leading this team? Or what is the one thing that the team could do to really improve our morale? Or what do you think that the thing is that's holding us back in terms of achieving what we need to achieve? Because if you've got a trusted relationship in which people feel like they can come to you and when it's not working, tell you it's not working and here's what we ought to do about it, that is going to be infinitely better than the elephant in the room or hidden agenda where everybody is pretending that things are going well, but they're really not. And they're not really focused on how do we solve the relationship issue so that we can get on to the performance issue that we're all here to deliver.
I think that that's great. Tell us how people can get in contact with you.
The easiest way would be Kip Knight on LinkedIn. I'm really pleased. I'm closing in on 18,000 in my network, and so if some of your listeners want to make it 19,000, that would be great. Kip Knight at cmocoaches.com if they want to reach out and specifically talk to me about any coaching that they might need or want to talk about. And also, I put a plug in. You mentioned it already, but I think the Learn to Leap book is something that a lot of people would enjoy reading. I've written two books. One is called Crafting Persuasion with two other individuals, Bob Pierce and Ed Tazian, and that's a fine book, and I'm really pleased that people are using it. But it's more like a textbook, and frankly, not a fun read. It's more of a discipline read. Learn to Leap is more like a novel. There's a lot of good stories in there, and a lot of good takeaways that you can apply in your real life. So yeah, go check out Learn to Leap. It's a good book.
Well, this has been like a master class on managing bosses, Kip. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Jim, it's been a lot of fun. It's something I'm passionate about. For the sake of everybody who's out there working, I wish we had more great bosses, and hopefully, if they could apply a few of the ideas we've talked about here, they can start to see some improvement.
Well, thank you for being on our show. And if you are ready from being a manager to becoming legendary, subscribe to our show and you'll never miss a deep dive. If today's conversation sparks some thought, leave a comment or share it with a leader who needs to hear it. And if you're someone who belongs on this stage, send me an email on that and we'll get you on our next episode. Thank you for watching Legendary Leaders.
Building Legendary Leaders podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.